There are lots of different categories of healthcare services that involve technology that are not telehealth.
Hello, welcome to the Better Outcomes Show, where we explore the possibilities of a new healthcare. Each episode, we bring you a conversation with leaders across the healthcare industry, exploring topics ranging from new treatment techniques and interventions to novel service delivery methods and business models. And now your host, Rafi Salazar from Rehab Practice Solutions, a leader in patient engagement and retention strategy. Let's explore the possibilities of a new healthcare.
Hello again. Welcome to another episode of the Better Outcomes Show. I'm your host, Rafi Salazar with Rehab Practice Solutions. And earlier this week, I was having a conversation with a client of mine, and we were talking specifically about their device or technology piece that they were looking at branching into the U.S. physiotherapy market, the physical therapy market. And one of the things that came up, which comes up fairly regularly, when my work with the market penetration roadmap, you can find that at strategy.rehabpracticesolutions.com, was this idea of understanding the value proposition to whom. Obviously, healthcare is very complex, specifically healthcare in the US. We've got the 4 Ps of healthcare: the payer, the provider, the policymaker, and the patient. And understanding who your value proposition is targeting allows you to take that and position it most effectively for that stakeholder. Basically, what you want to do is you want to align your technology or software with the targeted stakeholder so that you're creating that consistent message to drive business development strategy for that specific healthcare market. For example, a provider, maybe a clinic or something like that, has very different goals than a payer. And understanding the differences between those two allows you to make your UVP make sense to the person that you're trying to talk to or sell to. So anyways, just something that I thought I'd throw out there. If you are interested in learning more about that, you can check out our YouTube channel. We've got tons of videos that have come out, tons of videos coming out on the idea of go-to-market strategy and value proposition. If you want to learn more about how we help clients do that, you can go to strategy.rehabpracticesolutions.com. That's strategy.rehab practicesolutions.com. Okay, let us dive into this week's episode. I know it's been a couple weeks since an episode has dropped, and quite honestly, it's totally my fault, and I'm unapologetic. I ended up being out of town for some work things, and then I ended up going totally off the grid for a couple days with my 2 oldest boys to do some trout fishing. If you follow me on LinkedIn, you would have already seen the rainbow trout that my son pulled in. He pulled in a nice 13-inch one with a tag, which is pretty cool. Anyways, cool. It was a fun trip all around. So now I'm back in the saddle, and I am looking forward to sharing this conversation with you all. I was able to sit down with, because a lot of my work recently has been with healthcare technology startups and companies looking to either sell services to payers or to providers, maybe provide a platform of some kind or help with some of these value-based arrangements. I was beginning to get exposed a lot to some of this the contracting piece of that. A lot of my work has to do with maybe getting the product into the right hands, some of that positioning, that go-to-market strategy. But the whole back end of that, like what happens after somebody finds the value in your product and you're going to go sign a contract with how you're going to provide services and the risk you're going to be taking and the compliance requirements, all of that stuff was way over my head. So I was able to get connected with this week's guest. Her name is Caitlin O'Connor. She's a healthcare attorney, and her firm is called Nixon Gwilt Law, and we'll link to that in the show notes because they are a healthcare innovation law firm. So they're highly specialized in this area. Basically all of the work that she does is on the innovative healthcare provider side of things, but their firm also handles the software, the platform, the startups as well on the contracting piece, and even the payers. So what we talk about in this episode really is a discussion about some of the trends that she and her colleagues at the firm have noticed around contracting between healthcare technology companies and provider organizations and even payers. So we talk a little bit about some of the security and information requirements. We talk about the delineation between what is privacy, what is security, and how legally it makes there's a difference between the two. We all, on my side of things, on the provider side, and then on the consulting work that I've done, I always kind of loop it together. Like, obviously, privacy, security are something we need to take care of. But she talks a little bit about the differences between the two. We talk a little bit about value-based care arrangements or managed care arrangements, and kind of the differences in risk level that you might see in the contract or in the terms of the deal, and then some things around compliance and the like. So hopefully, if you're a provider organization looking at bringing on board a partner to help deliver some sort of care, either value-based or otherwise, but tech-enabled, this will give you a little bit of insight about, okay, what are the things that we need to be considerate about as we bring on board a partner or a technology partner. And if you're a technology company, maybe this will help you with understanding a little bit about the mind of what's the context and the environment in which these healthcare providers and payers are making decisions, and kind of what are those value drivers for them and what they're thinking about as far as technology, ease of use, compliance, all of that. So without further ado, here's Caitlin O'Connor talking specifically about contracting trends in the healthcare technology and healthcare innovation industry. Well, hey, Caitlin, welcome to the show. How are you?
Hi there. I am doing well. How are you?
I'm doing all right. I'm looking forward to talking about all the legal and contractual things around healthcare technology and all of that. But before we dive too deep into the weeds, tell us a little bit about yourself, what got you into contracts and legal stuff, and then what you're doing now.
Sure. Yeah. So kind of a long story, but I'll try to keep it short. So when I was in law school, I didn't really have a good sense of like what I wanted to do until I took a health law class. That the health law class I took in law school was the only one I actually enjoyed. So that kind of indicated to me that I wanted to be in health law, but I didn't really know what type. And then once I graduated, I found the current firm that I'm at, which is Nixon Gwilt, which is a healthcare innovation law firm. And I very quickly dove headfirst into all things healthcare technology and healthcare innovation. And I just thought it was the coolest thing ever. I don't enjoy a lot of confrontation in my day to day. So I prefer the contracting side. I always say, like I get to do the fun type of law where everybody on the call is usually moving forward toward the same goal versus like being in litigation where, we're fighting over something. So I think just kind of a little bit of it was by happenstance. A little bit of it was just sort of figuring out what I actually enjoyed. And I think once those two things came together in healthcare technology and transactional work within that space, I really just kind of found what I loved. So that's how I got here. In terms of what I'm doing now, I am a partner at Nixon Gwilt Law, which, like I said, is a healthcare innovation law firm. We work with lots of different types of innovators within healthcare, from innovative healthcare providers to digital health companies to, biotech and life sciences. My focus is really more within the innovative healthcare provider and the technology company space. So most of my clients are technology companies that are selling to healthcare providers, payers, health systems, employers, et cetera. So I'm usually, drafting the contract, negotiating it from the seller's perspective, and helping my clients understand what types of risk they should or can take, and how the contracts that they are signing are going to impact their business, both in the short term and the long term. So that's me. That's kind of a high level summary. And yeah, if we want to get into more details, if we have more questions about like what I do, definitely let me know.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, and that's kind of why I wanted you to come on the show. So we work a lot here with healthcare tech companies that are looking to sell to those providers, those payers, and all that. So the idea of like, okay, let's get somebody in here who's a bit of an expert on the contracting piece is very good for us. So we talked before a couple weeks ago about some of these high level like big trends you see in specifically contracting with software or tech companies for virtual care management and that sort of thing. So kind of you had laid out three big trends. So why don't you lay out the three big trends and then we'll kind of dive in as we kind of go forward.
Sure. Yeah. And I'll quickly just sort of give a little bit more context to what I
Sure.
mean by virtual care management, just to kind of set the stage. So
Yeah.
there are lots of different categories of healthcare services that involve technology that are not telehealth. And
Yes.
that's really important because that means we are outside of the very restrictive healthcare laws that existed prior to COVID and may go back into effect at the end of 2024. So when I talk about virtual care management, I'm thinking of things like chronic care management, remote patient monitoring, transitional care management, behavioral health integration, those categories of sort of remote services that are inherently intended to manage a patient's care over time versus being based on more of a, encounter-based sort of one visit approach. So that's kind of what I'm talking about. And that's where sort of some of the trends that we talked about come into play. I don't remember the specific ones that I mentioned last time we spoke, but I have three to say today. So I don't know if they're the same. If there's any that I missed, let me know. But what I'm seeing most in this area is, first and foremost, I'm definitely seeing more value-based arrangements, more value-based contracts. So a lot of my clients are earlier stage companies. We certainly have lots of mature companies as well, but I really enjoy working with early stage companies, getting creative with founders. And where a lot of those clients started out very successfully selling to small provider groups or even smaller hospitals and smaller health systems, they're now getting a lot more interest from value-based organizations like
Yeah.
ACOs, IPAs, managed care organizations, healthcare payers coming directly to the company to implement a value-based arrangement with them and sort of provide a particular technology or service to all of their beneficiaries. So that's the first one. And I think we talked about that one. Definitely more value-based arrangements. I'm also seeing very strict security requirements from health systems in particular. So where, a couple of years ago, a contract would say, you as the technology company have to be HIPAA compliant. We're starting to see a lot more specific requirements and a lot stricter requirements. So, just in the past week, I've seen contracts from large healthcare organizations, both actually ACOs and health systems, requiring things like SOC 1 and or SOC 2 audits, high trust certification, or other types of third-party frameworks, compliance with other types of third-party frameworks like ISO or the frameworks from NIST, and things like that, where previously, again, they were very broad. We just relied on the BAA. I'm now seeing a lot stricter requirements, which as an early stage technology company can be expensive and a little bit scary if there's not guaranteed revenue coming from that deal. But, for what it's worth, I think a lot of technology companies can and should expect to see that more. And I think on your side, on the buyer side, it makes a lot of sense. We're seeing more and more risk on the cybersecurity front, more ransomware attacks, more breaches, things like that, as we become a more technology focused world. So, it makes sense. I think it's just kind of the trend that the industry is going. So more value-based arrangements, stricter security requirements. And then the third one is one I already kind of mentioned briefly at the top of this response, which is more action from payers. So again, lots of my clients started selling to provider groups, hospitals, health systems. I'm now seeing a lot more interest directly from payers. The challenge there, and we can get into it in a minute, is that every one of those conversations is different. Every contract looks different, where, my clients could use kind of one template to go out and sell to providers or hospitals. it's not as easy to use one template contract with every payer that you talk to, because they all have different things that they care about and different things that you have to comply with. So that's kind of the third one. It's a little bit challenging. It's definitely newer, and we're all kind of figuring it out and navigating as we go, including the payers, I think. But it's happening, and it's exciting because I think it's an opportunity for technology companies to bypass the provider reimbursement and go straight to the payer, where, instead of getting indirect payment through the provider for services that are part of a reimbursable service, now some technologies are able to go directly to the payer, get directly paid by them, and it's just a little more certain on the revenue side, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. So those were the three that we had talked about earlier, so you pass.
Oh, perfect.
Let's talk about the security first, kind of get that out of the way, and then we'll dive into some of these the action from the payers and value-based contracts and all of that. So from a contractual requirement, I think a lot of times when people are thinking about, okay, security, the main thing that they're thinking about is HIPAA, but you laid out a whole bunch of other stuff. So it's not just HIPAA that companies need to be worried about. There are other security and privacy requirements. And is that one of those things that is going to be different from contract to contract between maybe this hospital system requires XYZ and the other hospital system requires something else that might be more or might be less? Or is there more of a standard, I don't know very much at all about healthcare. It's technology security and all that. So I'm it sounds HIPAA is kind of where my go-to, but then there's more, it's much deeper than that, right?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So on the security front, HIPAA is actually pretty broad and intentionally very flexible.
Yeah.
The standard under HIPAA is that you have reasonable safeguards in place, and reasonable is a pretty subjective term. It can mean a lot of different things. So to sort of combat that flexibility and add a little more certainty around security, there are third-party organizations that have developed their own frameworks or ways that organizations can get certified to sort of signal to the industry that they've got secure practices in place and that they're focused on privacy. So a lot of times under a BAA, I see very standard references to HIPAA, just like we've always seen. But on that security front, like I said before, what I'm seeing a lot more of are organizations like health systems. I just saw a contract from a large ACO the other day that required more specific things. For example, SOC 1 and or SOC 2, those are different types of security audits that technology companies can do. They are usually annual, and it's sort of a ongoing check on all of the company's security and privacy practices to make sure they're doing things well and to identify gaps and then fill those gaps. So SOC 1 and SOC 2 are pretty common. Another one is high trust certification. That's sort of another framework, and it comes from, I don't exactly remember, but there's that's sort of another framework that I see a lot of. And again, that is a third-party certification process where you conduct an audit, identify gaps, do penetration testing, stuff like that, and make sure that your software and your practices are secure and again focused on privacy and maintaining privacy. So I would say, SOC audits and high trust are the most common that I've seen at that higher level. In some cases, my clients do not yet have SOC 1 or SOC 2 audit practices in place. They haven't done it yet, nor are they high trust certified. And so what we've sometimes done is through negotiation say, okay, you health system will give us 12 months or 18 months to get those first SOC audits out of the way or to get our high trust certification. And in the meantime, we'll comply with ISO 27001, which is just another sort of security framework that doesn't require certification, but is a framework that sets forth very specific security requirements. And so you can kind of get creative in those negotiations. If you've got the funds and the time to go ahead and get high trust certification or conduct your SOC audits, like do it, because I think a lot more buyers are going to require it. But if you don't have it, it doesn't mean that you can't go out and sell to these very same organizations. You're just going to have to get creative, at least from the seller side, from the technology side,
Yeah.
about how to reach that and how to make your customer comfortable. I think one of the driving forces behind all of this is that hospitals and health systems have been very focused on HIPAA, as have other types of healthcare providers. And so they don't necessarily have a robust understanding of security generally. They don't necessarily have a robust understanding of what security standards are available, what security practices are available, or what are normal. They're usually coming to the technology company who's coming to their lawyer or their third-party privacy advisor or security advisor to help them figure that out. So again, I think that's why we see this focus on third-party certifications and audits, because historically healthcare providers have not been so focused on specific security practices. Instead, they've been focused really on HIPAA. And so as we kind of shift to a more technology focused environment, they are relying on those third parties to help the industry establish what's appropriate and what's going to keep patient information safe.
Yeah, and I'm assuming those audits and stuff require some cash, right? They're expensive to maintain certification and to maintain the standards and all that. So there's some planning that's involved there, and it's not just. I'm thinking back now to a board meeting I was on a few months ago. It's not just like healthcare systems, even it's like contracting with government organizations, right? I think like Texas had a law that if you were going to contract with the state of Texas, you had to have it was a very high standard of security and the audits and all that was going to go in place for the information exchange between the government agency and this tech company, right?
Yeah, for sure. States have their own frameworks, governments have their own frameworks. At the end of 2022, the FDA added cybersecurity regulations to the application and approval process for medical devices. So it's certainly an area where, it's definitely not just hospitals and health systems. Like I said, I saw a contract with a large ACO provider group that was requiring these third-party certifications, definitely government agencies. And then states as well are starting to develop their own privacy and security laws. Just to sort of clarify, there is a difference between privacy and security. A lot of times they get talked about the same. Privacy is more about protecting data and what the laws say about how Yeah, exactly. And then security are the safeguards you have in place. So two-factor authentication, or if you have physical files, locking the door and who has access to it. So they go hand in hand, of course, but they are slightly different. Most state laws are focused more on that privacy, right? Like who has the right to access the data? What can I as a patient do to protect myself? And then those third parties are the ones that establish the security frameworks to maintain the privacy that the state laws are coming up with. So
preventing
the law
somebody
will say
from
the
hacking
privacy,
in and holding it ransom and charging you millions of dollars and all that.
Yep, exactly. So it's happening across the board. It's certainly not just health systems and hospitals. It's something that I think anybody selling in this industry or operating this industry should be thinking about.
Awesome. Cool deal. Well, we'll put that techie stuff aside now. Let's dive into some of the other 2 points. So you said you're noticing a lot more value-based contracts. So let's talk a little bit about then the shift from like a fee-for-service model, which is what's typically been happening, to these value-based reimbursement schemes or whatever. So how's that affecting the contractual agreements between healthcare tech companies and either provider organizations or, like you said, the payers themselves? So I guess let's talk about it on the provider side. So healthcare technology company is now looking at selling to a provider, and they're now engaged in this value-based reimbursement arrangement. How's that affecting the contract between the two?
Yeah, so a couple of ways. I think the first one is that fee arrangements are changing. So previously, for the last couple of years, and still actually this is very common, but a lot of the contracts that I negotiated between my clients and healthcare provider buyers or ACOs or whoever were based on a per patient per month fee.
Yeah.
So the provider pays a per patient per month fee for all the patients that are on the platform or enrolled in the services. And that was very much, or is very much, based on what the provider gets reimbursed in that fee-for-service environment. So providers can't split fees with technology companies. They can't share them in ways that are impermissible under state and federal law, fraud and abuse laws. But a lot of times, the only way that these arrangements are economical is by making sure that what's getting paid out is less than what's coming in. And so a lot of times those fee arrangements were based on reimbursement frameworks. Now, just to sort of clarify that actually a little bit is, a lot of times we see services that are structured around CPT codes. So the CPT codes for remote monitoring require supply of a device, interaction with the patient, monitoring and management of the data and the patient's condition, and the fee structure between the technology company and the provider were very similar. It was very much like the technology company is going to provide the device, it's going to provide 20 minutes of monitoring, they're going to provide X, Y, and Z and get paid a piece of that. What's changing now is the fee arrangement, and then also the way the services are described. So the fee arrangements in particular, I'm seeing more risk-based approaches. So instead of saying, you provider are going to pay me per patient per month on a flat fee basis, I now, as a technology company, am going to an ACO and saying, okay, ACO, I understand you're getting judged up against this benchmark that CMS sets. We're going to help you reduce your costs to keep you below that benchmark. And if we reduce them X amount, we get a percentage of your savings. So, the way that a lot of value-based arrangements work is that, in a capitated model, for example, the value-based provider gets paid a flat fee to provide a certain set of services, and it's up to them to manage their costs. So rather than billing for a specific encounter, they're getting paid X amount to provide primary care services to a patient. That's kind of how an ACO works.
They get like a global fee to manage it and they're good to go.
Exactly. So now technology companies are saying, we'll help you manage your costs so that your margin between your costs and the benchmark is more, and we get a portion of that. The challenge with that is there's no one size fits all approach, right? It's a little bit harder to come up with a repeatable or scalable model from ACO to ACO or from an ACO to a managed care organization, because they kind of all have different priorities and different incentives. Where before I could say, for all of my customers that are billing Part B fee for service, I'm going to charge X amount for 20 minutes of time or X amount for each device. ACOs and managed care organizations might not have the same, they might not care quite as much about the per device or the per patient fee. They might be focused more on patient engagement and other types of outcomes.
Exactly.
And you have to be creative and customize your offering to the buyer. So that's where the fee arrangements are changing. They're more customized and they're more based on that sort of overall benchmark or reducing costs or focus on outcomes than they are on each encounter or each sort of block of time that the technology company provides. The second way, like I said, is what did I say was the second thing that's changing? The fee arrangements, and then, the way the services are described.
Yes.
Right. So the second thing I mentioned is that the other thing that's changing is the way the services are described. So again, previously we described the services in a contract based on the specific things that get reimbursed under CPT codes or something very similar. Now, again, the services are pulling in a lot more value drivers, such as patient engagement. So now I, as the technology company, I'm not just providing you with a remote monitoring device and staff to monitor the data. I'm providing you with a remote monitoring device, 90% patient engagement, 85% patient adherence to the recommended treatment plan, 80% medication adherence, whatever it is. And so we're starting to describe the services and include those types of value drivers more so than we did or had to do in a fee-for-service environment.
Yeah. Well, and that in and of itself describes like how complex and individualized it's going to be, because not only are you dealing with like the specific, let's say it's patient engagement, like how do you quantify that, but then also it's like the population that this, that this ACOs might serve might be, what if it's a lot of chronic, diabetes or chronic pain or whatever, like the population being treated as well will shift some of like how the service actually gets delivered and what happens in practice, right?
Yeah, and I've actually seen some population-based agreements where my clients are going in, a lot of technology solutions these days are more and more focused on
It's
specific
specialized. Yeah.
populations, specific disease states. And so I've seen contracts where, my clients go to an ACO and say, we're going to work with your chronic kidney disease population, or we're going to work with your diabetic population and change these factors for them. So there is some room for creativity there as well to focus on those specific populations. It's challenging to do
Yeah.
because that's not how the ACO gets paid, and that's not the way they usually get measured against the benchmark. So you've got to do a lot of work with your own data and with the ACO's data to figure out what those numbers should be. But yeah, it's very customized. It's an opportunity to customize things and to kind of be first movers in that space, but it's also a little bit challenging to just figure out what the right numbers are and how to make it work for patients and providers and the tech company.
Yeah, yeah, because there's risk all around there. Somebody once told me it's better to be a settler sometimes than a pioneer, because pioneers get arrows in their backs, and if you do it wrong, I can see how that shifts so much towards like we're losing big money on this contract trying to manage just this one population for this ACO or something like that.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, and then the ACO is afraid for years to buy
yeah.
more technology to help their diabetic patients or whatever. Yeah, for
Exactly.
sure.
Yeah, it burns on both ends. So, okay, on the side of the payers and or the providers, what about this action from payers? So, how is this working on, I guess, like a practical level? These payers are reaching directly out to these technology providers, and then what? They're requiring providers to utilize this technology, or is it more the technology companies are kind of on the back end managing the data and the outcomes? Like, how's that working in your experience so far?
Yeah, so I think it's probably a little bit of all of the above.
Okay.
It certainly depends on, it certainly depends on the technology solution. There are great data analytics solutions that are helping payers and providers just analyze data and figure out what types of technology solutions to implement, what types of direct patient solutions to implement. So that certainly exists. On the sort of on my side, what I do, well, other attorneys in our firm work with data analytics companies and negotiate those types of arrangements. I'm more focused on the care management solutions, right, that are focused directly on the patient care. And again, it kind of depends. Sometimes the payers are reaching out. Sometimes my clients are just going through the payers' procurement process. Like sometimes they put out a request for applications, sometimes they don't. Sometimes you just message someone on LinkedIn and get lucky that you messaged the right person. So it's again, it's not a one size fits all on that front either, like how they're connecting with payers. There are a lot of different options, but once you get to the contracting stage, it also varies, right? So some of my clients get paid directly for technology and the payer provides it to all the beneficiaries on a per patient basis, or focus on outcomes. It could be one or the other. In other situations, the payer says, we'll cover this for our provider organizations that are contracted with us, but you as a technology company still have to go to each of those provider organizations and sell to them. And so what you end up doing is signing a contract, like a services agreement with the payer, with a statement of work or with an attachment that you then take to each of the provider organizations and say, hey, if you sign this statement of work, these are the things we're going to provide to you. And, Optum will cover it, or BCBS will cover it, or whoever. So there are different ways that works, again, depending on what the technology solution is, who the payer is, and how they're looking at your platform. apart from all of that, payers are also acquiring software. So they're
Yeah.
actually going out and acquiring software companies. So they have more control over how it gets delivered and how it gets provided to patients. So again, lots of options, lots of creativity. It's a newer area. So I think the key takeaway there is that there is no one size fits all. And when you're an earlier stage technology company, sometimes you just have to be willing to be creative and take risks. Yeah, be flexible and take risk with the payer and just sort of see how it goes. Like some of my clients definitely do that. So it varies, but lots of opportunity for creativity there as well. I think a lot of technology companies in the next couple of years and payers are going to come up with some really interesting arrangements that we haven't seen before.
Awesome. Cool deal. Well, Caitlin, thanks so much for this. We're getting near the end here. I always ask people as we're getting ready to end, if there are one or two main takeaways. In this case, let's say it's a technology company listening to this and they're trying to figure out, should I go value based? What are my approaches for an ACO or something like that? What are a couple main takeaways you would have them walk away with from the episode, specifically around the contracting side of things?
Sure. So I think for technology companies that are interested in value-based arrangements, the first thing they have to do is figure out how to tell the story of their data. Lots of remote monitoring companies, lots of care management companies, lots of data analytic companies have a lot of data, but they didn't set out to collect that data in a way that was necessarily going to make it easy for them to then transition to value-based arrangements and say with certainty the types of outcomes they can provide. It's difficult to say how much you're going to reduce the cost for an ACO, how much you're going to improve patient engagement without really solid data that is organized and reliable.
Yeah.
And so, you may not have gone through a clinical trial where you had a very specific structure for the data and very specific ways you were analyzing it and looking at it, but it might be time to start thinking about it in that way and to start to think about your data in a very structured way so that you have comfort and confidence in what you're promising to a payer or an ACO in a value-based agreement, but also so that the story that you're telling and the value that you're selling makes sense for the person you're talking to. ACOs care about something different than payers.
Exactly.
Providers care about something different than ACOs, and it just varies. So, think about your data, think about how to tell the story of your data, and make sure that the story you're telling makes sense for the person that you're talking to, for the buyer that you're trying to sell to.
Yes. Yeah, we talk about
That's
that all the
my main
time.
takeaway.
You gotta answer the question, value to whom, because they're all looking at it different. So awesome.
Exactly.
Caitlin, I'm sure you're gonna get some responses here. So where can people find you, find more about what you're doing, maybe even reach out for help on the contracting side, or somebody else, maybe one of your colleagues on the security and privacy side? Where can people find you, work with you, all of the above?
Sure. Yeah. You can always find me on LinkedIn. I think that's how you and I initially connected. Caitlin O'Connor on LinkedIn. You can email me. I will, maybe in the show notes, we can put my email address in there, or even our firm website, which is just nixongwiltlaw.com, NIXONGWILT law.com. I'm on there. I think you can get my email from there. If not, I'll send it to you, Rafi, and we can put it in the show notes. But yeah, just shoot me an email, message me on LinkedIn, whatever makes sense. I'm open, very happy to talk to whoever has questions or, just wants to kind of learn more.
Yeah, awesome. And we'll link to all of that in the show notes. So thanks so much. Have a great one.
Thank you so much. You too.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Caitlin O'Connor, specifically about the idea of technology and contracting, what goes into some of these contracts, some of the back end, some of the negotiations, the requirements on all the parties and what they look like. For me, it's just fascinating to hear that kind of this kind of discussion, because it's one of those things that as a clinician, I was never really privy to as a staff level clinician. And as a consultant working with some of these organizations on the business development side of things, it was one of those like, well, business development is done. You landed the deal, and we're gone. So it's interesting to see kind of the inner workings of some of these contracts and what really is included and what's involved in all of that. So, anyways, thank you to Caitlin for sharing her insight and expertise in this area. We're gonna link to her LinkedIn profile and the Nix and Gwilt law firm's website on the show notes. So you can head on over to rehabilipracticesolutions.com, click on the drop-down menu for insights, and under the podcast for this week, for this episode, the links will be there. If you are one of those people that's interested in exploring this more and talking with an expert, she's definitely one of those people to talk to. So one of the things that I thought was very interesting, and I think about this kind of a lot throughout my day, especially when I'm having conversations with prospective clients and clients in the healthcare industry that are bringing some kind of tool or technology to market. And there tends to be a lot of angst maybe around some of the rules with CMS, and will telehealth be here in a couple years once it all goes away, once the things expire at the end of 2024, like Caitlin mentioned. To me, I've always thought of the real value, the potential value that healthcare technology brings to the table isn't so much like these one-on-one visits or telehealth and like direct service delivery through virtual means, which does have its place, but it's really, like she said, the value is in these, at least the way I see it, the value is in these other software tools or technologies that enable like long-term care management, like remote patient monitoring or communications, or streamlining the actual course of care or the process of care, that doesn't necessarily require maybe a billable encounter, like in this fee-for-service model where if you're not drilling, you're not billing, but something that allows contact, a touch point, an overall and general smoothness in the continuity of care for somebody that might have a chronic disease like diabetes or even chronic musculoskeletal pain or something like that. But that doesn't necessarily require a heads up or a one-on-one telehealth visit. I really think that in the next several years, as some of these payers and payer organizations begin exploring, really diving into more of these lump sum payment models and other value-based arrangements, maybe shared risk or shared savings programs or something like that, the value in these tools, and I was just having a conversation with a client about this yesterday, the value in the tool is not so much that you're going to be able to bill telehealth with it or bill RTM even or RPM with it. It's the fact that what the technology is going to allow in the long run is a decrease in the cost of delivering care to that individual or managing this individual's chronic, complex medical situation. And that really is the value. Sure, there's short-term gains, maybe in some fee-for-service arrangements where you can bill for this code or that code. But in my mind, what I'm thinking of is like the long-term value that these tools are providing us is really the ability to effectively manage a patient's condition without or at a fraction of the manpower, the clinician's time, as was once needed without that tool. So anyways, just my thoughts on the subject. So if you like the show, head on over to iTunes, leave us a rating and a review. It helps people find us. If you want to see videos of the interviews, we have those up on the web page on the YouTube channel. Just search for rehabilipracticesolutions.com. There's a whole playlist of the video interviews for the episodes. And if you want to learn how Rehab U Practice Solutions can help you, if you are a healthcare technology or innovation company, head on over to rehabilipracticesolutions.com. There's more than one way to click a link somewhere and get scheduled on the calendar to have a conversation with me. And I'd love to talk with you about what you've got going on and if there's any way I can help. Until the next time, folks, be safe, be healthy. I will talk to you then.
Thanks for listening to the Better Outcomes Show, where we explore the possibilities of a new healthcare. Our hope is that you walk away from each episode informed, equipped, and empowered to push the boundaries in your own practice or business. We want to give you the tools to help you build strong, long-lasting relationships with your patients and clients, helping meet their goals, improve their health, and achieve better outcomes. Learn more at www.rehabilipracticesolutions.com. We'll catch you on the next episode.